I am so looking forward to this next panel. I get to sit with friends, honestly. And so joining me for this conversation, hey, everyone quiet down. Thank you. Joining me for this conversation, we have Merijn Dols, the managing partner of Now Partners and the co-founder of the Future Economy Forum. Round of applause, please. Philip Teverow, the co-founder and CEO of Yolele. Round of applause. Bigger, everyone. Come on, keep your energy up. It's the last day of Climate Week. Julia Collins, the founder of Planet Forward. Round of applause. And Riana Lynn, the founder of Journey Foods. Thank you. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Did you survive this week?
Yeah.
Everyone looks good. Everyone looks good and bright and shiny.
We made it.
I'm so pleased to see you all here. Thank you so much. So Julia and Riana, I'd like to start with you because you're my favorites. You're both working to leverage technology and gather data on our food and agriculture systems. I'd love to hear from you both what is missing and why is it important that there are things missing? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Well, can I first say I just wanted to say that I'm so proud of you for doing this in and out every day, every week, every year. And this is like my 10th event speaking, and just thank you for always putting Dirty Foods in my cell phone. So I wanted to say I appreciate that. Thank you for this work. What's missing? There's so much missing, and I think that at Journey Foods we're really trying to collect that through global data that supports a system that is quite young when we think about food and agriculture around the world. Right, modern food science is about 80 years old. Global supply chains are just a little bit older than that.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of things wrong every single day trying to feed 8 billion people, and we focus on packaged processed foods. Unfortunately, they're more than 60% of like the global daily diet, and we think it's really important. And I think it's really important that we map out nutrition sustainability and cost data. And the reason why we chose that was because a lot of companies try to get things right. They try to improve and want to improve sustainability metrics. They want to improve the nutrition and things that go into our bodies. But it's really hard to make those changes without actionable data and cost data and thinking about the bottom line. And so we've aligned and brought AI into the modern processes of food science and supply chain decision making, and happy to go into that more. But for us, we just think that a lot of the global South data is missing when it comes to nutrition and sustainability metrics, and a lot of cost data is missing for a lot of these same things. And I'm happy to continue these conversations where I learn every single day where we can bring on more data to the Journey Foods platform, and I think these opportunities are really key to that.
Yeah, actionable data. I love it.
Yeah.
Julia.
I think that's really well said, Riana, and I like that the question is about what's missing, because sometimes you turn up at Climate Week and it can feel a little bit like a best in show for every organization that wants to tell you everything that's gone right and everything that they're doing. But if we were all going right and we were all doing everything that we were supposed to be doing, we wouldn't be here. I don't actually want to come to Climate Week again next year and hear more about everything that everyone's doing that's good.
Right.
We need points of inspiration, that's fine. But there are things that are missing, and one of the things that's missing in my world, which is very much about gathering high quality data on Scope 3 emissions to help companies decarbonize the 90% or more of their emissions that are coming from their value chain, is collaboration between brands and retailers and food service companies and their upstream suppliers. So this is a call to collaboration for anyone in the audience that wants to join something called the Aligned Reporting Initiative. Planet Forward and the Climate Collaborative and Sensiba and many retail partners are aligning around a way to ask questions of upstream suppliers that is aligned and that's not so burdensome. And so that's an example of me making a specific request for collaboration, and I think that's also a little bit of what's missing.
It's so helpful. So again, Aligned Reporting Initiative, look it up, get in touch with Julia. It's great that collaboration is happening. Can you talk a little bit more about why aligned data and this actionable data is so important to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, in order to go from sort of setting a net zero target to actually making progress on a decarbonization goal, you have to understand what's driving your emissions. You have to know everything from your head office down to a head of lettuce in the fields, which means that at some point you have to gather primary data from your upstream suppliers. You can't just rely on global average emissions data. That's good enough to get a start, but it's not good enough to make progress.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important that we're collaborating and getting that primary data into the places where it can really drive decarbonization strategy.
It's great. And collaboration is the most I've heard regenerative the 1,000 times that John De La Pera did too, but I've heard collaboration so much more this year than any other year. So that's something that's positive that I think will move us forward. Philip, if I can turn to you, I had the honor of talking to Carrie Fowler yesterday, and you and he have a great concern about crops that have often been sort of left behind, underutilized crops, or as Dr. Fowler calls them, opportunity crops. And I'm wondering if you can talk about these crops that are sort of thought of as poor people's crops, that are so resilient to the climate crisis, so resilient to pests and disease, but a lot of people except Yolele have just not paid attention to.
Well, there are a lot of these, and I think largely because of yield. So much of the world's attention has focused on crops that have benefited from the attention of generations and generations of breeding and improvement. You look back thousands of years, and wheat, maize, rice didn't look like they do now. There are still so many of these crops that have not benefited from that improvement, but that are resilient to climate change and that can feed a changing world and the people who inhabit it, and that require some attention, whether it's in terms of improvement and, in our view, in terms of processing and attention to agronomic improvement so that the yield can improve even without the benefit of breeding, generations of breeding.
And that processing point is really important because, we can talk about more nutrient dense and nutritious foods all day long, but they really need to taste good. And the processing that you and Pierre have developed really helps that taste and sort of the flavor of all the things that you're creating.
Well, most importantly, it can make those crops viable ingredients for industry, because for large industry to use what we call an underutilized or opportunity crop, there are risks, and large industry is averse to risk. In order to de-risk that, we are introducing processing capacity that can reduce the post-harvest losses, increase the availability, and process at scale, and reduce the price as well, because a lot of the background behind why some of these underutilized crops are underutilized has to do with their cost, and a lot of that has to do with inefficient processing. And we need to introduce efficient processing to these crops.
Can you just briefly call out some of these crops, like your favorites?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. So we focus on fonio, which is has a lot of virtues. It's drought tolerant, pretty densely nutritious, and it's a grain, can be used like any other grain in all kinds of foods or beverages, and supports livelihoods for mainly women who are growing this crop to feed their families. And it's not really a cash crop, but it can be a cash crop if the right attention is devoted to it.
It's delicious too. It's easy to cook. It's delicious. Everyone go buy some Yolele fonio after this. Go to Whole Foods. Go to your local cooperative. I'm your biggest champion.
It's a gluten-free grain that cooks in 5 minutes.
Awesome. It's awesome. Thank you, Philip. Merijn, we've talked about how yields have been emphasized for so long, sort of throughout these conversations. Shakuntala mentioned it earlier. But that has meant a really narrow focus for our food system. And I said this earlier, we've been good at filling people up. We're not good at really nourishing them. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, some of the things that we just talked about what's missing, what are the crops that we're relying on. I honestly think that there are two main things that are missing. One is our system literacy, our ability to understand and actually see systems. And we still think that the world is a big, giant machine, a little bit in those beautiful, like, Darwinian drawings of animals that are made of cogs and wheels. And in that world, you want to be centralized. In that world, you want something that is able to produce one factory that produces all the, let's say, yogurts for the entire country. But that comes with a lot of challenges and problems, because now you're over-engineering it, you're shipping it for long distances, but also you need quantities of those same ingredients in that region. And in that sense, for me, what is missing is a transition towards a more distributed system. And if I'm really honest, this week has been mainly a major frustration. Mm-hmm. Because the past climate weeks, because I've been coming at these for way too long, the past climate weeks, people on stage were at least trying to defend that they didn't have to change. Now everybody's moved beyond that point and has understood that they can't stop ignoring it. So therefore, we're getting these cute little iconic stories of how we have met the farmer, how we have changed this little brand, but they represent 0.1, 0.2% of revenue of a company, because it's still not moving into the heart of the business, because there's still this conviction that there's a dichotomy between impact, socially and ecologically, and between business success. And so in my opinion, also with that, we're not only missing on one hand side the ability to understand that this needs to move towards a distributed food system, but we are also missing better stories. We are missing the stories that actually solving the climate crisis and solving the social inequality doesn't need a polar bear. It is simply better business. It is something that actually can be driven by the CFO. And if you look at companies like, for example, Natura in the cosmetics industry, then they are not only the world's fourth biggest beauty group, but they're actually also the biggest conservation agency in Brazil, because they protect 2 million hectares of land simply by providing an economy to the indigenous peoples that makes those forests worth more standing up than when you chop them down.
Yeah.
And in their sales model, provide 800,000 jobs to marginalized women. So for me, those are the things that are still missing, and I wish we didn't have to come in a year after having gone through the circus again. I think we will, and I think then we need to hear better stories.
Yeah, we need to hear better stories. I think frustration is good, but I want to ask you all, as people who work in business people, helping business, is it better business that's going to solve this? Julia, I look to you.
Yeah. Is the question whether or not there's a business case for sustainability? And the answer is there absolutely is. And I'll give you an example. One of our customers in New York is Just Salad. I hope many of you have enjoyed this amazing company, right? We work with them to be the first in the industry to put carbon labels on their products, really giving consumers the opportunity to choose food that was aligned with their values. We work with them to identify opportunities to reduce ingredients. This helped us to recommend Simply. I hope you've all had a chance to hear the amazing Sorella from Simply speak this week. And we showed them that regenerative and organic certified quinoa could be swapped out for conventional quinoa and reduce the emissions for that product by 200%. They were be able to preserve the cost of the dish. They were able to get 126% same-store sales increase, which is hard to do as a salad company in New York City.
Right.
And so there is always a business case for sustainability, but you have to be willing to have the conversation.
And you have to be willing to do this really hard, difficult work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rihanna?
I think there's a lot of hard, difficult work and a lot of hard conversations to have and honesty to present. But one thing that I've been really thinking about is like the optimism of really sitting back and thinking, like, what if we get this right? What if we are really imaginative? What if we're really creative with what we do? Being and running an AI company, we have to think about, and I think about the fact that there are so many systems that we were using just 2 years ago that are so much better today. Mm-hmm. And, what if we come together and think about the folks that are and can think and curate teams that care about ethical AI, for example, folks that curate really well, like your team. And I think that we have the actors and the players that are really passionate. I think we still need to diversify some of those solutions a little bit more. But I do think that we have to imagine that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be smarter solutions than ever.
Yeah.
We kind of just have to be creative in how we think about it and who really leads those sort of business efforts.
Such a hopeful message. Thank you for that. That gives me a lot of oomph to get through this. Philip, Riana mentioned this, and she said the honesty of your product. Your products are so honest, and I'm wondering if you can talk about how that sort of transparency has benefited you and the whole company.
Well, not enough. But I want to address the last issue that you just raised a little bit here.
Yeah, of course.
There's a tension between, of course, business can generate impact and is key to sustainability, is essential. The participation of business is essential. But there's a tension between the risk of future, the business's future. How is it going to supply itself if something happens with potatoes? If you're a potato chip company, what happens if the ground is too wet and there's no potato crop? Then what do? You have to diversify.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if they're public companies, they are paying attention to quarterly results. And that tension is very real. And I don't know how to address that, but that's systemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Merijn, do you want to comment on that sort of tension?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, this is where, for me, the question is about a question of better stories. Because if you look at who invests typically in those major food companies, then they're institutional investors, and it's a very defensive part of an investment fund. And I actually think at the investor level, people would be aligned with diversifying, and through diversifying actually creating more resilience within these businesses, wherefore you can get your year-on-year returns more. However, this all happens within a system, and in that system there are portfolio managers whose own bonuses and whose own actually livelihoods, because when you say bonus, it sounds like something awful. But when you think about livelihoods and you're trying to actually have a living in Greenwich, Connecticut, just up the road from here, then you're kind of dependent on that income to feed your family and to sustain your life, who are misaligned with the incentive to shift that business. Nevertheless, if you look at the data, right now, society is paying 2 to 5x the revenue of food companies in negative externality. So every packet of food that you buy out there that is $1 actually is putting a burden of $2 to $5 on society. And that's little by little being pushed into the price. And the margins of food companies are sliver thin. The reason why the quarterly earning calls are so tough is because they're actually only met often through financial gains and not actually through operational gains, because the system has been going to its breaking point little by little. And on the other hand side, there's data, for instance, Intrinsic Exchange Group has computed this, that if you manage land differently, and I'm talking both working land, so agricultural land, and conservation land, we actually have an opportunity to generate $125 trillion in ecosystem services capacity every year. That is more than the world's cumulative economy. So that's, for me, what I mean with telling better stories. The story has to be told in a way that the CFO is driving the conversation. I've been saying this week, as people in sustainability, our job is to put all the CSOs, all of us, out of a job, because it needs to be simply driven as a business decision.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to talk to you all about sort of if we want, if we want this better business to be sort of the norm and not the exception, how can we accelerate that? What are the levers that will accelerate this process?
I mean, I do think doubling down on what Merlin just said, we need better stories, We talk a lot about data. Data alone don't move societies. It's the way that we wrap data into credible stories that really moves the needle, so I think that's one. I think really continuing to find opportunities to improve the outcomes of businesses while they're improving their sustainability strategy. I know it isn't always the case. There are tensions. There are real tensions. But the more times that we can show that revenues improve, that costs decrease, that risks are mitigated, that new markets are open, that employees are retained, I think it's really important to highlight those times when sustainability can be a win-win.
Yeah. Thank you. Rihanna?
Well, I think, going back to your first question, we have to think about also what's missing in terms of like policy and metrics
Yeah.
and how we're measuring things. I often think about the fact that like when economists measure the input of the workforce, they often miss the input of women that stay at home when they generate, tens of thousands of dollars for the economy. Each woman that just stays at home, and they're not a part of like the measurement of workforce.
Right.
And there's so many metrics that we're not instituting through policy, and I think there's really opportunities there, and that feeds into storytelling, that feeds into reporting that we do nationally and globally and even locally. I also believe that we have to continue to find ways to think about the groups of storytellers that are missing. I think even here in the space, there's an opportunity to think about the real true shifts in marketing and how people access information. I think there are a lot of young Gen Z millennial influencers that aren't at these conversations, that sometimes are looked at as not experts in the field. I was recently selected to be a creator for Kamala, and there were 200 of us that were just selected for random reasons, but there were tons of articles that came out that pitted us against journalists over the past few weeks, and we actually got twice as many. We got 500 million. The RICA DNC got 500 million views on our content, twice as many as like traditional journalists. And I think those shifts are real, and we have to be really honest about how the world is changing with new technologies.
I love those shifts too. I was on a panel this week with young influencers, and they were incredible, and I learned so much from them. And like, you're right, there's this tendency to sort of like, oh, that's not real, and the rest of us are doing something real, but that's not true.
Yeah.
We have to listen to the young people, as we heard on the last panel. I just, I want to give you all the chance to give a call to action in the final 2 minutes we have. Merijn, what's your call to action for everyone in this room?
So get your bullshit bingo cards out. It's collaboration. But it's not to write another white paper. It is actually to take a region, for example, in the food system. Take a region, look with organizations like reinsurance, like Swiss Re, who know what we would think of, and actually figure out that they are no longer reinsuring those regions because of all the risk. Therefore, there are business cases to be made to help them de-risk capital that then can help finance the transition, which can help reduce the burden on the farmers, which needs longer-term off-take agreements, over-diversified crop streams. All of that work, that's real collaboration. Writing another paper on what the perfect NDC looks like is only going to waste paper.
Thanks, Merijn. Philip, you can clap.
Whether you are in international development or in food manufacturing or in banking or in farming or in eating, diversify your portfolio.
Right on. I love that. Thank you, Philip. Julia.
The cash needs to flow. If you're an investor, send the term sheet. If you're a large enterprise company, issue the purchase order. If you're an eater, buy the product. We need more dollars flowing in the right direction.
Thank you. Rihanna, last word.
I would say hire more non-traditional roles to the C-suite. We need more CMOs and CIOs and chief sustainability officers that have never carried these roles before, but understand through their traditions, through things that they've picked up on in global economies across the world, to be in leadership. And I truly believe that's the future.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you so much, friends. Give them a round of applause. You're all incredible. Thank you.